Yes, I'm going to talk about a couple of questions that have come into the Ask John Mackay site about the chronology going from Jesus' death to the resurrection, and how come there's a constant reference to 3 days. Now, isn't there a problem with the calendar there? So if we can go to my slides, let's have a look at that. Yes, so we're going to go from the 3 days and the third day. Those words come up quite often. And we had a number of skeptics comment to us, but there's a particular question there. If I can just get these slides to move on. Let's see. There we go. Right. 3 into 2 does not go, because if Jesus died on a Friday and rose on a Sunday, well, that's only 2 days apart. So why are there constant references to 3 days? And people have come up with various excuses for this. One is, well, isn't there a contradiction and we can just write the whole thing off? And some well-meaning Christians have come up with a theory that, well, maybe Jesus was crucified on a Wednesday, and there is a specific question on that on the Ask site if you want some more details. But let's have a look at some of the references to 3 days. So Jesus himself, fairly early in the Gospel of John, has one of his numerous run-ins with the Pharisees and the priests, and Jesus challenges them there, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. And we are told in the text there that he is referring to his body. Now, if we move on a little bit further, after Jesus was recognized by the disciples, and particularly by Peter, and they came to understand that he was the Messiah, the Son of the living God, he then began to teach them about his death and resurrection. And so we have recorded here by Luke, and he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. So all of the Jewish authorities, elders, chief priests, teachers of the law, he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And then later we also have another interesting statement here when he challenges them, the Jewish authorities, who demand a sign, which was rather ridiculous. I mean, he'd done all of these amazing miracles, some of them within their own turf in Jerusalem, some of them out in the country, but they would have heard about them. Jesus challenges them. No, I'm not going to give you a sign. You should know from the scriptures and recognize me as the Messiah when he rose from the dead. And so he told them, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, that doesn't mean they were going to dig a hole down to the core of the earth. In the heart of the earth means out of sight. It's a way of expressing the grave. And then finally, the Jewish leaders knew what he meant with the references to 3 days and the third day, because they went to Pilate, which would have taken a fair bit of courage, and said, Sir, we remember that while he was alive, that deceiver, that's referring to Jesus, that's how much scorn they had poured on him, after 3 days I will rise again. So they quoted Jesus as saying that. So give an order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Now they specified how long they wanted the guard for. It wasn't for 2 days or for 4 days, right, until the third day. And then after Jesus did rise, but before the disciples came to understand this, there's that lovely story about how 2 disciples were walking to Emmaus and Jesus joined them, and the disciples told Jesus, they didn't recognize Jesus at that time, but they said, this is what happened. We were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel, so they were hoping that Jesus would be the Messiah. Indeed, besides all of this, today is the third day since these things had happened. So they'd given up any hope. It was the third day. So let's have a look at how we number days, how we refer to them. Well, in our Western calendar, of course, we're going to look at the events that actually started on the Thursday and go through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, our days go from midnight to midnight, and we have these pagan names for them. So the first event that we do remember associated with Easter time, of course, is the Last Supper, and we refer to that in some traditional churches as Maundy Thursday, which refers to the new commandment. And we'll go into the Latin about that if you like, but we'll just skip over that. So we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now we have these pagan names for them for various historical reasons. The Jews certainly wouldn't give them those names, and we also have to remember that our days are measured midnight to midnight, but we need to look at Jewish time, which doesn't go from midnight to midnight, and they certainly don't have those pagan names for them. So if we look at Jewish time, it goes from sunset to sunset, and in fact the week for the Jews sort of revolves around the Sabbath. So when does the Sabbath start? Well, it starts on the sunset of the day that we call Friday in our modern calendar. So looking at the days that are involved in the events over the Easter story, it starts off on the 5th day. Then we have the 6th day, which is also called Preparation Day, and that's important for the events that are happening. Then there's the Sabbath, and then there's the first day of the new week. So what happened on those days? Well, we have the last Passover with the disciples, which in fact ran through the sunset to the next day, because remember when they went out from the last Passover with the disciples, John specifically says it was dark. We have the crucifixion, and we have the Sabbath day when Jesus was in the tomb, and then we have the resurrection. Now, it still looks like the crucifixion and the resurrection are only 2 days apart. But there is a way of resolving this, and we need to think about how we experience days. What is our lived experience of the passing of time, of the passing of days? And I remember I first came to understand this when I learned about a particular disease which rejoiced in the name of benign tertian malaria. And the tertian refers to tertiary, right, which means 3. Now, this is a disease with a whole lot of spikes of fevers. It's an infection caused by a parasite. So that if you were to look at a sort of chart of someone who had this disease, they have these fever spikes. And if you were just looking at an overview of this disease, well, you'd say, you would describe this as a febrile illness with fever spikes every second day. So why is it called tertian malaria? Well, if you consider it from the patient's point of view, if you ask that person, well, what happened? How did you get sick and what happened? They would say, well, on the first day of this illness, I had this roaring fever. I was really, really sick. Then the next day it went away and I felt all right. And then on the third day, it came back to bite me and I had a roaring fever again. So the patient's description of the disease is it starts off on that first day when they had a roaring fever. That's how it began. And it came back to bite them on the third day and so on. So it got that name of tertian malaria. So how do we relate that experience of the passing of time to going back to our Jewish time? So the last Passover with the disciples, that ended on the first day when Jesus was put on the cross. So we do have 3 days. So The day of the crucifixion is the first day. Then the day of Jesus, when Jesus spent in the tomb, is the second day, and the day of the resurrection is the third day. But what about the reference to being buried for 3 days? We still can't quite work that out. Well, again, go back to people's lived experience of how you experience days. And the Jewish scholars did acknowledge this. And there's a couple of references that we have put in the question on the Ask site. If you want a whole lot of more references to the Bible and to various historical references, there's a PDF article that you can actually download off the Ask site there. But there is an interesting explanation of how the Jews experienced time and described the passing of days in one of their rabbinic writings. We have a teaching, a day and a night are as an onar, and a portion of an onar is as the whole of it. So onar just refers to a period of time, not specifically a day. But your experience of when you go through a period of cycles of time is that a portion of it you experience as being one of those days, if we're counting days. So now it's not as arbitrary as it sounds, because it does relate to people's lived experience. So if we go back to our events of the various days, the first day is also the day which is the preparation for the Sabbath, the day that Jesus died, being the first day. Jesus died before the first day had actually finished, and the Jewish authorities wanted Jesus buried before the Sabbath. And there are Bible references to that, because it would have been a terrible abomination if they had to experience the Sabbath day and you had the crosses with the 3 bodies on them. So they wanted Jesus dead and buried before the Sabbath. And we are told how that happened, the fulfillment of that prophecy about the rich man and him being buried in the tomb of a rich man, because we know that Joseph of Arimathea and assisted by Nicodemus, who also contributed to the burial of Jesus. And also there were quite a number of witnesses to these, including a lot of women. We'll go into that next week. But anyway, if we look at the time period involved with Jesus being buried, he was buried before that day was out, on preparation day. Then we have the day of the Sabbath, which went from sunset to sunset. So Jesus was already in the tomb, and then he remained in the tomb until the next day started, and rose probably sometime in the early morning, because we know that at first light, when it was safe to go out and see where you were going, the women went to the tomb to finish the job that they hadn't been able to finish when Jesus was buried, because of the haste in which he was buried. And Jesus had risen then. So Jesus was in the tomb from that first day to the third day. And if we count each one of those days as being a whole day, right, the 3 days does actually work. And we do have the testimony of the Apostle Paul to this. In fact, he presents his summary of the gospel in 1 Corinthians, and we need to remember that Paul was a trained rabbi. He was a Pharisee, so he was very steeped in Scripture even before he became a Christian. Later on, he was specifically taught by Jesus. If there were any contradictions, he would have known it and he would have picked them out. But we have the testimony that Paul has, for what I received, I passed on to you. So in other words, what he had learnt from his own study of the Scriptures and from Jesus himself, what he had received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that's what we've seen that Joseph shared with you are all according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, right, according to the scriptures.